It's 1323 BCE, and the most famous pharaoh in history is dying at 18. His name is Tutankhamun. He will be forgotten for 3,000 years and then rediscovered in 1922 when Howard Carter opens his tomb and finds it intact, the only unlooted royal burial in Egyptian history. The gold mask, the treasures, the curse. None of that is what killed him. What killed him was his family. Tutankhamun's parents were brother and sister. This is not speculation. DNA analysis conducted on his mummy in 2010 confirmed it. His father, almost certainly Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who tried to replace the Egyptian gods with a single sun deity, married his own sister to produce an heir. The heir was Tutankhamun. The results were visible in the body they found in the tomb. He had a cleft palate. He had a clubfoot so severe that over 130 walking sticks were buried with him, presumably because he needed them. He had Kolar disease, a bone condition causing the foot's navicular bone to deteriorate. He had multiple strains of malaria, which his compromised immune system could not fight off effectively. He had a badly fractured leg that had not healed properly before he died. He was 18 years old and he could barely walk. The Egyptians had a theological reason for sibling marriage. The gods married their siblings. Osiris married Isis. The pharaoh was a god on earth, and gods kept their divine bloodline separate from ordinary human contamination. The theology was elegant, the biology was not. Tutankhamun died without a male heir. His widow Ankhesenamun, who was also his half-sister, wrote a desperate letter to the Hittite king asking him to send a prince for her to marry, because she refused to marry one of her own servants. The Hittite prince was murdered on the way to Egypt, possibly by the same court official who ended up marrying her anyway. The 18th dynasty died with Tutankhamun. 3,000 years later, the boy pharaoh is the most recognizable face in ancient history. He is famous for what was in his tomb. He should also be famous for what his family did to him before he got there. The Egyptians kept their bloodline divine. The Habsburgs kept theirs profitable. 2. Philip IV of Spain. It's 1649 and the King of Spain is signing the marriage contract for his niece. The niece is Mariana of Austria. She is 14 years old. She was supposed to marry Philip's son Balthazar Carlos, the heir to the Spanish throne. Balthazar Carlos died of smallpox the previous year at 16. The marriage contract has been reassigned. Philip himself is now the groom. He is 44 years old. He is her uncle. He is also her first cousin once removed because his mother and her father were siblings. The marriage is, by any genealogical measure, deeply complicated. By Habsburg standards, it is completely routine. Philip IV had already married his first cousin once, his first wife Isabel of France. He had also fathered somewhere between 15 and 30 illegitimate children outside the marriage, by mistresses throughout his reign. Of his legitimate children with Isabel, only one, Balthazar Carlos, survived to adulthood, and then Balthazar Carlos died at 16. Philip needed another heir. Mariana was available. The marriage produced 5 children. One survived to adulthood. His name was Carlos. He will appear at the end of this list. Philip IV ruled Spain for 44 years and presided over its steady decline from the most powerful empire on earth to a country losing territory on every front simultaneously. The treasury was empty. The army was stretched. The silver from the Americas was being spent faster than the ships could bring it. He died in 1665, leaving a 4-year-old son on the throne of a disintegrating empire. The 4-year-old was the product of a marriage between an uncle and his 14-year-old niece, following a dynasty of cousin marriages going back 4 generations. The empire did not survive what came next. Neither did Carlos. Some dynasties damage their heirs slowly. Some accelerate the process. 3. Leopold I, Holy Roman Emperor. It's 1666, and Leopold I is working through his list of potential wives. The list is short. It is short by design. Leopold is Holy Roman Emperor, King of Hungary, King of Bohemia, Archduke of Austria, and the most powerful man in Central Europe. The woman he marries must be royal, Catholic, and politically useful. The Habsburgs have been narrowing the definition of acceptable marriage partners for 4 generations. By 1666, the acceptable candidates and the Habsburg bloodline have become almost entirely the same thing. He marries his niece, Margaret Teresa of Spain. She is 15. He is 26. She is the daughter of his uncle Philip IV and his aunt Mariana of Austria, meaning her parents were uncle and niece. Margaret Teresa herself has a coefficient of inbreeding so high that modern geneticists calculate she was more genetically similar to a child of first cousins than to a child of unrelated parents. She and Leopold share the same great-grandparents on multiple lines simultaneously. Their children reflect this. Of the 4 children she bears him, only one, Maria Antonia, survives infancy. Margaret Teresa herself dies at 21 of complications following her 6th pregnancy. Leopold remarries twice more, both times to women from the same narrow pool of royal Catholic European families. His third wife, Eleanor Magdalene of Neuburg, is not a Habsburg by birth, which represents something close to genetic diversity by the standards of the dynasty. She produces 8 children with Leopold, 5 of whom survive to adulthood. Leopold rules for 47 years. He fights the Ottomans, the French, and the Spanish succession all simultaneously. He is considered a reasonably competent emperor. He is also the man who kept feeding his family line back into itself, producing children who were related to their own parents in multiple directions at once. His Spanish cousin, inheriting the Spanish branch of the same dynasty, had fewer children and less luck. By the time Spain needed an heir, there was almost nothing left to work with. The Habsburgs had been building toward one man for 200 years. He was waiting at the end of the list. 4. Ferdinand I of Austria. It's 1836, and the Emperor of Austria cannot eat without assistance. Ferdinand I is 43 years old and has been Emperor of Austria for 2 years, inheriting the throne from his father Francis II, because there is no one else. He is the product of double first cousin marriage. His parents, Francis II and Maria Theresa of the Two Sicilies, were first cousins through 2 separate family lines simultaneously, meaning every grandparent they shared twice. Modern genetics estimates Ferdinand's coefficient of inbreeding as one of the highest of any European monarch in recorded history. The results were comprehensive. Ferdinand had epilepsy, severe enough that he suffered multiple seizures daily at points in his life. He had hydrocephalus, a buildup of fluid around the brain. He had a speech impediment so severe that his sentences frequently dissolved mid-thought. Contemporary accounts describe him as sometimes lucid and charming and sometimes entirely unreachable, depending on the day and the seizure schedule. He could not dress himself reliably. He could not eat without supervision. He left behind a diary that historians have studied closely because it is both touching and difficult to read. A man trying to organize his thoughts in writing when his brain would not organize them otherwise. He was not without awareness. He reportedly once said, when told he could not eat a certain number of apricot dumplings because it was inappropriate for an emperor, "I am the emperor and I want dumplings." He got the dumplings. He did not govern. His ministers governed. Prince Metternich, the architect of post-Napoleonic Europe, ran Austrian foreign policy through Ferdinand's reign as if the emperor were a ceremonial prop, which functionally he was. Ferdinand signed documents placed in front of him. He attended ceremonies. He smiled at the right moments. He abdicated in 1848 during the revolutionary upheavals sweeping Europe, retired to Prague, and lived there quietly for another 2 decades, collecting butterflies and writing in his diary. He died in 1875 at 82, the longest-lived emperor in his line, an irony that history did not bother to explain. Ferdinand I was not the worst outcome the Habsburgs produced. He was simply the most visible one. The worst outcome was his cousin's cousin 2 generations earlier on the Spanish side of the family. Some dynasties survived their genetic mistakes. One did not. 5. Charles II of Spain. It's November 1st, 1700, and the last Habsburg king of Spain is finally dying, and nobody in Europe knows whether to grieve or start a war. They start a war. Charles II is 38 years old, which is remarkable. Physicians who examined him during his lifetime and historians who have studied the records since are still faintly surprised he made it this far. He was born in 1661 to Philip IV of Spain and Mariana of Austria, who were uncle and niece. His coefficient of inbreeding, calculated by modern geneticists using the full Habsburg genealogical record, is 0.254. For reference, the child of a brother and sister has a coefficient of 0.25. Charles II was genetically roughly equivalent to the product of a sibling marriage, achieved not through one incestuous union, but through 2 centuries of systematic cousin marriage, layered on top of cousin marriage, layered on top of uncle-niece marriage, stacked until the bloodline had essentially folded back on itself. The consequences were total. He could not walk until he was 8 years old. He did not speak until he was 4. His tongue was so enlarged that he could barely chew food and spoke with a persistent lisp that made him difficult to understand. His jaw, the famous Habsburg jaw that appears throughout the dynasty's portraits, in increasingly exaggerated form, in Charles had become so pronounced that his upper and lower teeth did not meet. He could not chew. He swallowed food, more or less whole. He had chronic diarrhea. He vomited frequently. He suffered from what contemporaries describe as fits, almost certainly epileptic seizures inherited from the same genetic stack that produced Ferdinand I a century later. He was also, by accounts that tried to be fair to him, not unintelligent. He hunted. He enjoyed music. He had opinions about governings, even if his body made governing difficult. He was married twice, first to Marie-Louise of Orleans, who reportedly wept when she found out she was marrying him, and then to Maria Anna of Neuburg after Marie-Louise died childless. Maria Anna also produced no children. The Spanish Habsburg line ended with him because his body could not produce a viable heir. 22 of his direct ancestors in the previous 6 generations were also descended from Joanna I of Castile. He was not related to his ancestors. He was his ancestors collapsed into one man. He spent his entire reign being fought over by France and Austria, both of whom wanted to inherit Spain when he died, both of whom understood that he could die at any moment, and had been understanding that since his childhood. He eventually signed a will, leaving Spain to Philip of Anjou, the French candidate. He died 9 days after signing it. The War of the Spanish Succession lasted 13 years and involved most of Europe. It ended with a French Bourbon on the Spanish throne and a Europe fundamentally reshaped. The Habsburgs, who had ruled Spain for 2 centuries, were gone. They had spent 200 years trying to keep the throne in the family. They kept it so thoroughly in the family that the family ran out. 5 kings across 3,000 years. An Egyptian pharaoh who could barely walk. A Spanish king who married his teenage niece and called it strategy. An emperor who kept the formula running until it produced a man who needed help eating. An Austrian emperor who ran an empire by attending ceremonies and signing things. And a Spanish king whose ancestors had been marrying each other for so long that he inherited all of them at once. Every one of these men sat on a throne. Every one of them was put there by a dynasty that decided blood purity was worth any price. The price, it turned out, was the blood.